There is another way that they came at us. Either you're bought out, money, or you're made ambassador, judge, what. They're not only holding out money, they're holding out public acclaim. So when you enter a room in your community, they say, oh, the judge is here, or and claps. So the first thing there, to keep it at bay, is the question, is there anything which you value, which can be more valuable than your aim?
What was your aim then?
My
that
aim
prevented you from taking the positions and the money and all that? Today we are joined by Pheroze Nowrojee, Senior Counsel, writer and poet. Welcome, Pheroze.
Thank you, Lucy.
I was particularly struck by the decision made by your grandfather to stay in Kenya. When Tulsi Ram is trying to leave and go back to India, and Pheroze is a bit curious because he's wondering where is he going and why does he need to go? And I was thinking about this and thought that, but that would also have been my reaction. I come here, I build the railway, and then I leave. But that wasn't Pheroze's reaction. And so I wanted to start off by just commenting about this sentence which says, contented himself with the thought, I shall not be leaving soon. But he never realized he had not thought, I shall not be returning soon. What does that mean?
In Tulsi Ram's thinking, he's returning to a place he considers home. Driver Pheroze is not looking at it that way at all. He is simply continuing a stay. And these types of events, these types of eventual events are not decisions. They slowly become convictions, and there's no formal moment when he says, "Fine, I am here." It's a series of comforts, not physical comforts, but that the mind is not pulling him in any other direction, especially not in a direction that says, you left your home, now come back. There was never that. So it takes, and one indication of that is, because they were contracted labor, one of the conditions of the contract was that every 5 years he would have 6 months leave, which enabled him to go to India, where he had come from. And when the first 5 years expired, he never used that. He just continued. And so so there is no moment of decision, and he is changing himself. Kenya doesn't change. The work was not changing. He was changing. And that is the journey, his journey.
It's like it becomes more home for him.
It did become. In fact, it became home. And that is a realization that comes long after the moment has actually taken place.
Yeah, I can see that. So now let's go back to the basic question actually, which is, why did you write this book? My friends, they always talk about, my grandparents came here, we were here a long time before to build the railway, but we didn't know the details.
Yes.
So I think that's why, this is an important book. But for you, why did you write the book?
The family must know what it is doing here. It's not the act only of others. So really, as a family, we're extremely fortunate that Grandpa kept his documents. My mother was clearing up her cupboard, and the Indian practice of keeping valuables and valuable documents is to then wrap them up in muslin or cloth, not in paper or anything like that. So one day Mom comes and gives me this bundle in muslin and says, you might like to look at these. So, of course, in due course, I began going steadily through this. And then I began to think, for all colonial subjects, imperial, oppressed subjects, the most important factor that keeps them subjected is the absence of personal histories. It is that their history is kept away from them, or what there is erased, or that they are made to adopt another history.
Let me interrupt you there to ask you, if the subject doesn't know their history, they can be erased. What did you mean by that?
Whole communities are erased by this, either by being completely not mentioned, or being mentioned as a footnote, or they're mentioned, but no, they're mentioned as servants of the empire. But what is their key position in the empire? They will never say. The empire is made up of only the people who came who rule it as imperialists, and their own stories. So, let's take these Dukhawalas. Why are there Indian Dukhawalas brought in to Kenya, Uganda, Muscat, Zanzibar, and so on? Because the British Empire was competing with the French, competing with the German Empire. And then when after Berlin, when they're dividing up the map and so on, what we now call Tanganyika and Tanzania was this German sphere of influence. And this northern part was the British sphere of influence. But the number of British people from Britain who were there was probably not even 100 at that time. The Germans were pushing in, and with as much settlement as they could. And so it was important that if you could not bring white British people to populate this empty, quote-unquote, empty space, because millions of Kikuyu and Mumias' subjects and all are not counted. You see, the counting is of the British. Now, since you couldn't fill that space with British, you filled it with those who were loyal to the British. So British Indians were brought in as traders and so on.
British Indians from India?
From India.
Oh, not from, okay.
Yes, from India. So, but if you read the empire histories, their function to be the safeguards of preventing German expansion and the empire is not. But if you read there, it's the white settler comes in and he lives in terrible things and he makes the country and he does ABC and all that is documented. That is how you erase. It is important in the empire, British Empire, to say that the colony, Kenya colony, is a good thing. We brought health and education, civilization, religion, etc. And this was the story. And they loved it. They want it. It's a good thing. We don't leave because all the people of Africa want these imperialists to stay there. Do you know how many military resistant movements there are in that 60 years? We don't. Till independence came and historians, both Kenyan whites and black Kenyans, began to dig in and then found. And one way to gauge is to see how many punitive expeditions were there. But the resistance is not shown. What is shown is these people were recalcitrant. And they had to be taught a lesson. So we sent a punitive expedition there. But when we look at the diaries, there were massacres. Absolutely. So, and how do you, so you erase, literally erase and metaphorically relay. Let me give you one small example. If you read the railway stories, it is that after the railway reached Nakuru and was going up the rift and down to Kisumu, the Nandi kept stealing the copper wires of the telegraph.
Oh yeah, that's what we learned that in school.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what we learned.
Because why do they like it? Because primitive people like shiny things.
So that wasn't true? They didn't?
No, it's true.
Oh, then?
Oh, so hold on. But what's the justification? The justification is to show that, you know, we had to stop that type of little satisfaction of tribal gaudiness. Actually, the Nandi were fighting and in constant battles with the forces that were supporting the safe passage of the railway. And that is all wiped out, erased, and we are shown, the Nandi are shown as the people who robbed these little things, etc. But could they stop the advance of civilization? Of course not. We taught them a lesson. They did more. They had to bring in the army. The pacification of the Nandi is shown as a sideshow to a railway. Now, why was it so important to pacify the Nandi? Because militarily they were in command of the land of the railway passage going through. So these small forces couldn't work that to bring in the army to do that. Now, that shows that the railway was a strategic instrument, not what is now said. We brought it for trade and we brought it for this. It was key to controlling Uganda, controlling the Nile, controlling the Suez, and controlling India. So these are the erasures from our side. And you learnt about the shiny coppers, wires being stolen. But now we have to teach our children in the schools, and we're not doing it. Pio Pinto doesn't exist in schools like that.
I was thinking that actually. I was thinking that it would be great if actually we read this book in history. You know, this kind of books were actually read in school, in schools.
Correct.
Okay, so then now your dad becomes a lawyer.
Yeah.
Right? And so when we meet him, he is going to Larry.
Yes.
Why on earth would he take his young son to what sounds like was a very dangerous situation?
In 1952, the emergency breaks out. Very large number of criminal cases because all the people who were being arrested were being brought into court and so on. And so the demand for lawyers was great. But the whole of the white bar refused to defend any Mau Mau people. That is documented, that is public, it's in my new book, where the offense was not a capital offense with capital punishment. If somebody didn't have a lawyer, well, the case just went on. But within the system, where there is a possible hanging punishment, the judicial department runs a pauper program. So senior lawyers would not, and they pay very little, till now, that is. That was the mechanism by which the people who were charged at Githunguri for the Lari trials had to be given lawyers. There were 3 big trials, each of them with 70, 80 people charged at one time, and about 10 lawyers each. So roughly the 3 trials took about 30 lawyers. I was in India for schooling, finished Form 4, and I came back for the holiday. I was going to university the next 2 months. In their term started in June, so I would be starting June. What did I want to do at that time? I too was only 13 and a half then, but I had been very clear that I would be like my father. But something happened more serious than just that. So he said, "We're going there, come. And would you like to come?" I said, "Yes, very much. I want to see this thing there." And so I went there and saw the trial, and 2 things were happening. I saw what I thought I wanted to do, which was defend against what I perceive as injustice. But I saw something else there. I saw those 70 people, and I'm looking at them, and I was looking at, there is a whole war going on all around. They're being killed. You simply had to be black and walking alone in a street or a forest or not, and by law you could be shot. What I was looking at, these accused persons, was their eyes. They never looked at, they always looked down. They never looked at the judge. But what that look down was a total rejection of that man sitting there with life and death in his hands. It was a total rejection of the process in which they were now compelled. And thirdly, it was a statement of being totally unafraid. It was such a determined rejection of colonial might that it reduced that might to a meaningless thing. How many people were you going to kill to say that these people love colonization? Here were people saying, "No, we don't." And I saw that, and I thought, yes, that sort of absence of fear is necessary even for their lawyers. Oh. And if I'm going to do that, I hope that I can do that. That is the sort of double effect of that attendance was. That is what that last chapter is about.
I see.
So it was a turning point in terms of what I thought the profession should be.
So let's go back to Kenya, independence.
Yes.
I often think about the United States, and I'll tell you why. Because the United States was also, in that sense, a colony of Britain.
Yeah.
And when they broke away from Britain, when they gained the independence from Britain, they really recreated a new state.
Yes.
When I think of Kenya, I realized all we did was change bodies. From now thinking back, because maybe then, I don't know, maybe it didn't occur to you guys, but thinking then, was anybody talking about the idea of Kenya? See, in the way in America when they talked about it's going to be a place where free and everybody is going to be equal and free to pursue life, liberty, and happiness.
Correct.
Very clear definition. Yeah. And everybody's equal. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
Because in England, you have the Queen and all that, and people are not equal. Did we ever have an idea? Right. Was that ever raised?
So, why are we looking at America as something worth looking at? Because there are documents there which we can look at and draw intent and the ambition and the creativity of that step, etc. and so on. Now, our grandparents did not write eloquent documents, but they lived eloquent lives. And we should be looking, to answer your question, did we have that? Yes, we had it in the lives of our grandparents. I'll give you a very simple thing. We look into the lives of our grandparents and we see the same things. We see that they too were seeking a community all over of equality in all persons, right? We valued life, we valued liberty, and we valued the pursuit of happiness. So let us then see, could we read the lives of our grandparents? I'll give you the simplest example. Your parents were brought up by your grandparents. Your grandparents, when they left this house, their house, it doesn't matter whether it's a civil service house or a hut in Nyeri Highlands, anywhere. When they went out of the house, there was this humiliation and harm. When they came into the house, they taught your parents to respect the grandparents, their parents, and everybody spoke respectfully to the elders. All right? That's not how colonialism went. So, the first thing we do is that we don't look only for documents or anything like that. We look to see and go back. We go to university and they say, write a thing about you. Where do you come from? I come from location 10 in Muranga. Fine, go and do some history on that. So you go to the DO's diaries, you go to National Archives, you do this. But the most important thing was not inculcated. Go and talk to your grandparents. How did they resist an atomic power? And how did they not then bring up their children, your parents, like that, etc.? Go and find out how they did that. So let's look for that. Number two, we think there are no documents. But now we begin to see that there are documents which set out when choices are made. Bits and pieces of how the Mau Mau thought about the country they would rule are coming out. Where did that come from? The Dedan Kimathi papers were found after his capture and brought in. Right? Have they been published by the colonialists? No. Where were they put? Anywhere easy to see? No. They were put in an archive which was emergency and confidential and so on, so that they don't spread things. Now, that was first brought out by John Nottingham and Rosberg. And that is where that small snippet about when the surrender terms were brought out by the colonial government, the Mau Mau held meetings. All right? No, as far as we know, Mau Mau consists of gangs who do ad hoc things. When they decide to kill people, they go and kill people. When they decide not to, when they do this, that, and the other.
Anarchy. Someone said it was anarchy.
But it was not. People were brought together to say, how do we respond? So they met and they discussed it. And what the DOs were sending out and the loyalists and everybody pressure, we are in a war. We are trying to kill you, you are trying to kill us, you are killing so many of your own people and you're killing widely and nothing is changing. Let's get peace. And peace is the way forward. So the Mau Mau considered all that, and what did they write back? They said, in the word peace, there is the big word justice. And so, effectively, they are saying, let there be justice about land, let there be justice about revenues, let there be justice about spending on schools and hospitals and all. These are political decisions. They're being expressed quite eloquently. So what happens to that whole thing? Only that snippet has come out a little bit. It's slightly a couple of paragraphs. But they are there. The Mau Mau leaders who are not in the forest are arrested in Operation Anvil and before, and they're put into the Mandile and Takwa maximum security prison camp. What were they doing there, among other things, is that the inmates, now who are these people? These are a Chenganeko, leader of a major community and national executive member, has been to Britain to represent Cow, etc. Pio Pinto, fluent journalist, close to the forest, everything. John Koinange, senior chief's son, his brother, Gitu Kangeri's father. These were really the top of what was not in the forests. They were spent time discussing what is the Kenya we want. We think we are the first people with slogans like the Kenya we want. No, they were discussing that in that camp. Pinto was a journalist. He was a great typist and shorthand writer. So he would be taking it down in shorthand. He would then write it out, and they would smuggle those things out when people were being released. But what prevents us from knowing more? 1963 comes. We are now free to tell our own stories. So John Nottingham sets up the East African publishers. So from 1963 onwards, Makhan Singh, when he's released, is speaking about the unions and so on. Right. By 1969-70, Kenyatta had made a choice. And he saw the history of the Mau Mau struggle, the history of their leaders, the suffering of these people, including his own suffering, becomes an example which contradicts the grabbing and the enrichment and the total distortion of the Kenya that was fought for. And he slams down any publications. So East African publishers is simply, the money is squeezed and it doesn't go. So if you now look at the publications on Mau Mau, written by those who participated and all, they were originally poor publications with the soft cover, very soft covers and newsprint, etc., because the big printing had been stopped. Do they teach Mau Mau in schools? Do they teach Mau Mau in university? Who brought independence? Did Mau Mau bring independence? Who brought independence? Mazahib brought independence. Was there no one else? Well, are you saying that Imam Mazahib didn't bring independence? Like that. So the archive of the Deelan Kimathi papers remains confidential. Charles John Joe actually got called for the Kapenguria trials proceedings, the files, originals, and from the courts, and took them to his chambers so no one could ever copy anything. These people destroyed whatever there was in writing. What happened to the Takwa camp? very sad. So when Pinto comes out, 5 years later, he has got them, etc. That's 1963. In February 1965, he goes to office, stops at the gate, he's shot, he's killed. It was to say there can be no opposition. That same night, his friends, in fear, took out every piece of paper from his study and burnt it in his backyard. People were there.
Okay.
So just to wind up,
yes.
that we have lost, by history, by chance, by bad governance, whatever it is, the sources of valuable looking.
But I'm trying to think a bit, can we go a bit higher and just think conceptually? Did any of these papers or any of these discussions you've ever come across talked about the idea of Kenya in conceptually? More than, because I feel sometimes we are caught up in, conversations about we need more roads, we need water, we don't have medicine, we don't have hospital. Obviously these are important. But if we answer the bigger question of who are we, then all these other things are much easier.
Correct.
Now you're even talking about the second liberation.
Yes.
And why are you guys discussing the second liberation? And again, you're talking about, okay, now we need rules, regulations, we need constitutions, we need new political parties.
Yes.
But I think there's a fundamental question that has not been responded to. Have you come across this? Has this ever been on the table?
The first and most important demand was the end of colonialism. And the end of colonialism meant not inquiring into what was the new state like, but get rid of colonial states. And so the new discussion about what Kenya was at Lancaster House was more about how to end the colonial state without robbing the white settlers, to be fair to those who had properly put in work, etc., what to do about these Indian traders who are not citizens but want to stay, and how do we bring people into opportunity and so on. So that was the first thing. But there were visionaries who began to see this as it became clear that the absence of doing that had enabled the Kenyatta regime to go at a tangent that was just so destructive. The issue was being raised for the first time in independent Kenya. I give you one name first, and that was Bethwell Ogot, Professor Ogot. And Professor Ogot is a historian, and he was a very, very close friend, an advisor, and a shared idealist then to Tom Mboya. And so Tom Mboya was with Ogot talking of a Kenya. They actually sat and discussed and won. Mboya is assassinated. Because he's the organizational, inspirational, competent, and really so eloquent alternative to this, even obviously within 3-4 years. And so by 1969, he is a threat. And so the program of a new Kenya ended there with Mboya. And Ogot became now nobody, from being the advisor to the second most important, a powerful politician. He was now nobody. They never took him into government or anything else. And he remains a writer and a very influential historian. From 69 to 2000 and something, Ogot writes the book What is the Kenya we want? So he pursued that dream. Through the more years, there was so much harm, torture and pushed in and abductions and disappearances, assassinations, that as lawyers, our very first thing was protection of people in there. Get them out of bail, get them out of the hands of people who are killing them, and so on, so on. So the first thing that we began to say is implement the human rights which are there, etc., etc. When Moy saw this, he clamped down further on the judges. So he would say, fine, go to court. And when we went to court, the judge would patiently listen to all our evidence and hear one thing from the prosecution and then decide wholly. And Moy would then say, the court found I was correct and that I am legitimate therefore. So the limitations of how we could use this became more and more apparent, and so we moved from protection to a demand for a new constitution. And so when we began looking at the new constitution, the question then arose. What sort of Kenya is this? And what will be the assurances that we can put in, which were missing there, which we can build in? What is social justice? How do we acquire it? In food, it actually has content. It says police can do this. How do they attack people? It says these are the values. You have to do the A, B, and C. All those values, fortunately, this new constitution has in it. How do we implement that? But first of all, how do we make 80% of Kenya aware that those values are there, setting out clearly?
Pheroze, so excuse me for interrupting you, but I get the sense that you're saying that the Constitution captures the idea of Kenya.
Yes. Yes.
This is what you're saying.
That is indeed. Because let me go reductio ad absurdum. What would you choose as the idea of Kenya which you are not finding in the Constitution?
I'm looking for something which is less prescriptive.
Yes.
I'm looking for something that is more idealistic.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The only thing about Kenya is the words Kenya. And the only time the Kenya spirit comes out is when we are under attack. And then we all say, we're Kenyan. What do you mean by saying that? You sort of say.
Yes.
But there doesn't seem to be anything that unifies us, an ideal that unifies us.
Yes.
But I get the sense that you're saying, yes, go to the Constitution.
There's a lot of law in the Constitution, as has to be, and the law is not prescriptive. The law is defending. Even X says only 40 characters, but it didn't stop the protesters from tapping into that very strong belief, you will not repress Kenyans again. That's true. Has happened. And we are saying that was an achievement of the second liberation. But whether it doesn't matter whose achievement or what, is it reversible? And we're saying no. We have at least a written thing there, some tools.
Okay, so let's go back then to you now. Two things. One, are you ever scared for yourself, scared for your family as you go on, especially when the things that you were saying during the Moi years? And then two, so you're satisfied, you feel that yes, we are on the path to this dream that you have, for the Kenya that you have. You're happy with the way,
Absolutely. What you see in the protesters is saying that the level of fear that was present 30 years ago is down. The level of repression may remain, or even increase, but the level of fear has gone down heavily. Was I afraid? Were others afraid as we were doing it? Yes. No one can not feel fear when there's danger to person, not physical danger, that has never bothered me, but feared that the family is affected, etc. Were there death threats? There were death threats to everybody. The first time it happened to me, the information, you can hear many things, but you better stop all this. I've heard people say you will be eliminated, blah, blah, blah. You listen to that. But when I got information from within Special Branch, then I had to take it seriously. And so I consulted with Jim Sorengo. So I said, Jim, what should I do? So Jim said, this was during the Kibaki election petition, because we put our case really strongly. We had information from within the government printers of the duplication of the printing. We attached that, got it, etc. They had no answer. So now the going on of the thing was a problem for them. So Jim said, when is our next mention? So I said, it's coming in the week. So he said, make that public. And so I did. When the housekeeping finished, I said, I have an application to make. This is the threat made to me directly, and that this is in relation to these proceedings, etc. And face up, they were very appalled by it. So the next day it's in the papers, etc. And they made a ruling saying that that sort of thing is not at all permissible, blah, blah, blah. What I learned, which I pass on to my students, is that making it public is a protection. And that then it slows it down, because then everybody says, yeah, but he said that there was a threat and now you prove it, blah, blah, blah. Mind you, you won't be there to celebrate.
Yeah.
So another time, Elchi, my son, and I drove to Manyani prison to see Sheikh Balala, who's been charged with murder, etc. But they really just wanted him to stop, because he was speaking the truth. And as a sheikh and an imam, people had trust in him, and he was speaking the truth, so they couldn't control him, just didn't know what to do. So we go in to the prison, and since we are interviewing him, Elchi is my assistant, I come in, he was at law school then, and we go in, we park the car but you park the car within the prison. So you drive into the prison, there's a park outside. But I'm going to see him as a lawyer. We go in, we park the car, and then we go into the inner prison and so on. We came out, got the statement, we talked, etc., decided what to do, and then came out, and we started off for home. And from Manyani, you're on the Voi to Matito Road and so on, and Elchi is driving, and then we going up and down, up and down. So I said to Elchi, slow down. And as we came down, and there was a curve, and he pressed, and there was nothing. So we went off the road, the car overturned, etc., and we landed up upside down, etc. It's only Almighty protecting us. We actually stepped out without a scratch. The car is right off. We come out onto this was the embankment. We come out, and we get a lift from Good Samaritans, and we come in. I went and told Gitobu. He said, where were you parked? This is a cut cable. Oh. See, without any hesitation said that. So otherwise I would never have let him drive. If we had the slightest, he would have been the first casualty. So There were other times when, again, we were told you are scheduled for a motor car accident. Bilu and I drove carefully, and once from Naivasha to, as we were coming up, a straight big oil tanker going straight at us. We had to go off the road, and just by chance, the road did drop, but there was a shelf, and the car bumped down and steadied and stopped. I mean, I stopped because it's still functioning. But that was no accident, because there's not only a yellow line between, but there were a whole lot of cars. And then to come out, and so there is another way that they came at us. Either you're bought out, money, or you're made ambassador, judge, what. All the time they're saying, you've done a great job, now you should look after your family, and now, here's a good thing, honorable distance, etc., and so on. As a starter, the Mercedes and the Range Rover will be there, etc., etc. They're not only holding out money, they're holding out public acclaim. So when you enter a room in your community, they say, oh, the judge is here, or and claps, and so on, so on. So that was a bigger danger. So the first thing there, to keep it at bay, is the question, again, what is your aim? So is your aim clear? If your aim is clear, then number two, do you value money or a post or false public acclaim? Is there anything which you value, which can be more valuable than your aim? Money, can money be more valuable? Any of these things.
What was your aim then?
That
aim prevented you from taking the positions and the money and all that.
Correct. So the feeling that a legal system was worth fighting for more because it was lasting and was a thing for all of us. That was the critical thing. By Moy's 24 years were extremely tiring. It's exhausting to constantly be on this thing. So one time I was visiting Binaifa in the US, and there I met old friend Albie Sachs from ANC. By then it was 2000, just my 22nd year. And so we had been together at Dar es Salaam teaching, and we knew each other for long. So he said, hi, how is Kenya? How is Kenya? So I said, it's bad, Albie, it's bad. So then I said, were you guys ever tired? Did you ever think of giving up or letting go? So he looked at me, and these guys had been there for 40 years. So he looked at me, and then he said, do you think that what you're doing is right? So I shrugged. He said, then what reason is there to stop?
Fatigue.
Constancy in your ideals.
Yeah.
But persistence in your actions. That has to keep going. Use every opportunity to subvert injustice. So we were in the courts, we were writing columns, we were campaigning. Every church meeting who wanted to hear us, we were everywhere. Every opportunity. So whether it is big or small, every opportunity to bring social justice is very, very important. Much is already in the Constitution and the laws. Enforce it. All of this is subject to so much changing events and chance that I can say to nobody, follow this and you'll be all right. No. I don't know whether I could have withstood if somebody had come and said, I'll do ABC. Or that some person whom I truly believe in said, enough now, stop. I don't know what I would have said. All such people in this are totally, can only function totally if the whole family believes these things. None of our children came and said, hey, I could have had, that kid is driving that vehicle, you never gave me a vehicle. Never. Nobody of these, that our children did that, because they believed in that. But, so this is not formula. This is just, thankfully, some things that made it work. And in those circumstances, many, many people who kept their mouth shut, who was Moi supporters, if they could, quietly, anonymously, would have. And they helped many, many people. Because there's no monolith. Our task is to make sure that these few people who say Kenya is the best place if tenders go to only one person and land goes to only one person, the number who does that are those who benefit. And the number, compared to 50 million, they're not even 500,000. So our task is always to keep that moral mass going in that direction that you want. What has been lacking when Jomo Kenyatta assassinated Pinto, everyone was silent. Everyone, anybody. Number two, when he assassinated Ronald Ngala, when he assassinated Tom Mboya, when he assassinated JM, all right, then people began to see this is something that will not stop. What was lacking was the social disapproval. It's a simple word, disapproval. How can you do politics with disapproval? You do it because the judge who came into court dismissed the young person's case simply because he was an opponent of Moi, and he was told, push that guy in, doesn't matter what the evidence is. And then he, in the vacation, he went home. And nobody said to him, just a minute, Judge, what are you doing? And there was not that. It took a great many years, as will happen anyway. It took their own children being pushed in for the elders to begin to say, Judge, you're coming here to church, all right? And you bring a big donation and all that, Harambe and all that. You know, we don't think it's the biggest thing. It took a long. Now, our social disapproval comes from that moral mass. That's what we have to bring in.
In your book, when you're talking, it starts off with the coup, 1988, yes. 1982 coup. And obviously, by the end of it, it turns out that the Asian experience of the 1982 coup was nothing like, was not the same for other people.
Correct.
And it's true, because when I went back to school and stuff like that, what had happened to my friends, I was in a mixed race school, what had happened to my friends and their experience was very different from what.
Quite right.
It was just exciting, and then it had stopped being exciting.
Yeah.
So that's the one question. And then two, there's a very interesting sentence that you said. I found it very curious, because you said something about you felt humiliated. Yeah, you said, my first emotion, this is Africa's 45th coup, or is it another number? My first emotion is humiliation.
Yes.
That is that we've done this to ourselves over and over again, and it hurts. Perhaps you'd be sad, perhaps you'd be disappointed, but humiliation, you didn't cause it.
We entered 1963 and the independence years as East Africans and Africans who were pushing off the colonial thing. And to have an attempted coup was to validate colonialism's denigration of us. And here, I was humiliated, but we were humiliating ourselves. And that was an emotion speaking as a person on the continent.
Okay.
This was so strong at that time and so much an important thing. What did 1982 not resolve? The question was the looting only of these people, no one else, and a lot of very vitriolic thinking and speech.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt to say this. I remember a friend saying this to me, and more than one Asian friend of mine has said this. Will I never be a Kenyan?
Correct.
Or when will I ever be a Kenyan?
Correct. We were publicly, privately, on paper, officially, we were coolies sometimes, then we were Asiatics, then we were Indians, then we were Asians, then we were Muhindis. Now the thing common about all these labels is that these are all colonial labels. They are not the labels you've given to yourself. See? So that was very, very important. In 1997, Dr. Isakia called a public meeting, and he said at a public meeting, I've called this meeting because your community is in so many aspects of Kenya in a role that has grown Kenya. But we don't see it reflected in the museum at all. I am the keeper of the National Museum, and the National Museum is the keeper of the nation. But if you come to and any tourists, school children, etc., come, you all are not reflected there. That's another example of the erasure of that period, that whole thing. So I want you as a community to meet and say, what can the museum do to reflect your various aspects? So I'm forming a committee now, and here it is. I was on the committee. Fine. So we sat down and we said, fine, in the exhibition, there'll be a picture of coolies building the railway, and there'll be this, and there'll be that, and the other. And we were guided by Dr. Sultan Somji, who was an ethnographer there. And so Sultan said, but whom are you talking about? All right? You're talking about yourself, but who are you? So we began discussing, so we can't keep coolie. It's no longer even a technical term. It's not Asiatics. That's been replaced. We can't be Indians, because from 1906 till 1948, Indians were called Indians because they were all Indians. But in 1948 with Pakistan, a large part of the Muslim community became Pakistani, and therefore wouldn't accept that they should be called Indians. Asians, yes, but that's not how we defined ourselves, so what are we? So we began debating, and what Sultan Somji said was, you have been here 200 years from Zanzibar and in Kenya all through all these years. You are now no longer wholly what the community was. So, yes, you are Asian. You are now part African after all these years. You guys are so visible outside Kenya. In India, they can tell us a mile off without us opening our mouths. So who are we? So you will not believe we discussed this for 3 years.
Wow.
All right. He said, what I am best able to define it, we are Asian Africans. That is what we have become, that is what we are, that is what we live. We even debated whether there should be a hyphen in between the two. It's that intense. We created an exhibition of the Asian African heritage and that was our past and our present. And that's what we are defining as. So, when we define it, this family history is not the history of this man anywhere in India. I've said where he comes from and when he went back what he found. But my heritage is this heritage in Kenya. Makhan Singh is this heritage. Pinto is this heritage. The Dukawala is this heritage. That is the approach to, will I ever be Kenyan? Before that, are you now understanding yourself better that you're Asian African? Right? Now, this question is now mirrored in the rest of Kenya, precisely. And so, we spent the first 50, 60 years asking ourselves, are we this Kabila first? And then we found that didn't work. We find we have the best constitution, we have the richest country in the region, but we didn't work at the cohesion. Will it work? Only at a cost, but more important, are we willing to put in that hard work? So, will I be like my grandfather, Pheroze driver, and stay on? Yeah, till they take me off with the boots on.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Pheroze. I hope we can have another great conversation at Mulli Book Club, and it's been a pleasure having you.